Is this the dagger?
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Right Way Sports Network YouTube channel. Back on a Friday night, and you know what that means. It's time for another On the Ball episode, one and only basketball show here at TWSN. As always, I'm your host, Will Lachlan, and I'm joined by my co-hosts, Justin, Thomas, and Nader. Guys, how are we doing? Justin, what's up? What's new with you, man?
I've been doing great. This week in the NBA, it hasn't been as dramatic, or there hasn't been as much news as there's been in past weeks. But we just got the Summer League championship. That was a fun game. The Summer League was fun. And we have some contract extensions and a few trades to talk about, so I'm excited.
Yeah, for sure. Thomas, what's going on, man?
Yeah, man, really, really excited. Like Justin kind of said, hasn't been a super exciting week. We got a bunch of things we can talk about, so I'm excited. Let's get to it.
And then Nader back in Chicago, right?
Yes, sir. Yeah. It's going to be a fun show. It's definitely more news than last week, and last week was a fantastic show. So we definitely got stuff to talk about, and I'm excited for another episode.
Yeah, for sure. Guys, before we get started, if you guys like hearing us talk basketball, then drop us a like. It only takes 1 second, and it just makes a massive difference for us. Gets us more traction in the YouTube Live algorithm, so more people can obviously see and watch our show and engage in the discussion. And obviously subscribe to our YouTube channel. We're almost at 1,000 subscribers, so we're right on the cusp. You could just drop us a sub. It'll be well worth it. We have content dropping on all different kinds of live shows, basically daily here at TWSN. Help us get over the hump. But let's get into tonight's topics. We have a few contract extensions to discuss, most notably Joel Embiid when it comes to just how good the players that got the contract extensions are. Kevin Durant did also have a contract extension as well, but that wasn't really surprising at all. So we don't really need to talk about that. But I think Embiid's one that's worth discussing a little bit. He's staying with Philadelphia through and through. So Justin, I'll start with you on this one. Do you think there's going to be any regret for Joel Embiid re-signing with Philly long-term in a few years?
It's hard to tell right now if Joel Embiid's going to regret this because of the Ben Simmons situation. If Daryl Morey would have pulled the trigger already on a Simmons trade, it doesn't have to be for some star caliber guy. Just get a scoring guard, someone who could put the ball in the hoop, something that Ben Simmons can't do whatsoever, and some picks along with that. I think that's a pretty fair package for Ben Simmons. And if they could have gotten that, that would have been much more helpful towards their chances to win next season and for the future. Or if they just pulled the Harden trigger, if they just made that trade straight up, I think that's a little overblown to the point where people are saying, oh, they could have traded Ben for Harden. There are a few more things, a few more factors going into that for the reason why they couldn't do that. But they should have still pushed for Harden as hard as they could. And if they keep Ben Simmons on this roster long term, which I don't think it's going to happen, I think by the trade deadline or by next offseason he'll be dealt. If they keep him long term, I think it's going to be a huge mistake for Embiid. And even if not, I think this was definitely a mistake as a whole, because if I'm Embiid, after this year, you had about 2 years left on your deal. I could be mistaken, but around 2 years left on his deal. He could have just weighed that out. And if Philadelphia, if they flopped in the East against teams like the Nets, the Bucks, the up-and-coming Hawks, the up-and-coming Bulls, teams like that, if they couldn't get out of the East, then Joel Embiid could just say, hey, I've been in Philadelphia for my entire career. At that point, it would have basically been a decade. I'm going to take my talent somewhere else. I want to win a championship because I'm a generational talent. I'm an MVP-type player. I want to go somewhere else and win games. So I'm not saying Philly can't win a title anytime soon. I'm not going to say they're going to regret it because their future's up in the air because of this whole Ben Simmons situation. But if I'm Joel Embiid, I would have put more pressure on the organization and made them make some more moves rather than just signing this extension up front and practically promising them his services for the next 6 years, because this is a 4-year extension, add on 2 more years. That's around 6 years. So I wouldn't have done this even if Philadelphia's future could still be promising.
Nader, same question. Do you think, is there going to be any regret for Joel Embiid years down the line? Maybe Ben Simmons is still on the team, maybe he isn't. And the Sixers, obviously the process, it's got them out of their rebuild successfully, but hasn't gotten them to the Eastern Conference Finals yet. What do you make of the Embiid re-signing or contract extension, I should say?
Yeah, at first I disagreed slightly with what Justin was saying, but now that I look at it, he made some great points. Embiid still does have 2 years on his contract. So if Philly were to lose these next 2 years in rather embarrassing fashion in the playoffs, what's the point in going back? Ben Simmons, I believe he will be traded this offseason, although looking a bit unlikely just because he's cut out, complete ties with everyone. At least another big story in sports is when it came to not necessarily basketball, but football was Aaron Rodgers. He cut tie with the organization, but he didn't cut tie with his teammates. And Ben Simmons did do that, especially his right-hand man or you can say his Batman to his Robin, and Joel Embiid. So I do believe that Ben Simmons should be off on the way, but it really depends, about Ben Simmons' trade value. Philly has him valued at such a high price, and I don't think teams are willing to give up that much. So I don't necessarily think that this was a bad deal for Embiid, but there's definitely scary negatives to it because he just committed himself to Philadelphia for another 6 years. And at one point, if this core doesn't keep winning, they're going to have to be eventually they're going to have to trade Tobias Harris. They're going to have to trade for young assets. And do you want Joel Embiid to be stuck in another trust the process rebuild? I don't think so. So it's definitely something that we'll have to wait to formulate and build up to finally make a right decision. But by the looks of it, there's definitely some downsides to it.
Thomas, do you think there's, on the other side, from a different perspective, do you think there'll be any regret from Philadelphia at all, just because Embiid is kind of an injury-prone player and he plays the center position? He's had just numerous injuries over the course of a career that's really hampered him in the playoffs, and it's just hard to see him sustaining. He had an MVP year, still dealt with an injury last year. Do you think him being on the roster as their star player for 6 years, is there going to be any regret from the Sixers?
I mean, there definitely could be. I mean, when he's on the court, no question, there's obviously not going to be any issues. But I just think, with that big of an injury risk, that is 6 years of generational wealth that you are paying to a big man who, while is very, very good when he's on the court, has serious problems when it comes to actually staying on the court. So I don't know, obviously they have to do it. I'm not saying you shouldn't have done it. I'm just saying, I definitely think they should be wary of it because of the type of injuries Joel has, alongside with his build and kind of play style. And from Embiid's standpoint, I really don't think he's going to end up regretting this. I mean, he has generational wealth to feed, to help his entire family for years and years and years to come. And I mean, I think at the end of the day, Ben Simmons is going to be traded at some point. They're just not going to keep him on the roster if they're serious about winning titles. And keep in mind, Daryl Morey has never been afraid to shake things up before, and he won't be afraid to shake things up again if Ben Simmons can't really step it up. Even if they keep him for this year, I think that there's no chance he's on the 76ers roster by 2022, 2023. He's going to be gone before then. I would be absolutely shocked if he's not.
Guys, we want to keep moving. Let's shift to a few other contract extensions that happened over this past week. Terry Rozier got a contract extension. I believe it was 4 years, $97 million. They paid him. Obviously, their guard lineup is obviously LaMelo Ball, Terry Rozier. They also had Devontae Graham last year and Malik Monk. Monk is obviously a Laker, and now Devontae Graham is on the Pelicans. So it's really Ball, Rozier, and Bouknight is their backcourt for the future. So, Justin, I'll start with you. How does a Ball, Rozier, Bouknight backcourt really look for the future?
This as a whole, I think it's pretty evident that the Charlotte Hornets are trying to get a team that can run the floor, push the pace tremendously, because last year that's something they did really, really well. That's something that separated them from a lot of teams, and they just kept adding with that. They got James Bouknight, again, one of the better scorers in the entire draft, and was definitely a steal, in my opinion, at the 11th pick. And they got a center in Kai Jones, which is the center position is something they've lacked for a while. They got Kai Jones, who's a guy that can run the floor and fits this modern style of basketball and can push the pace as well. So I think with this Hornets backcourt, it's going to be interesting to see how Bouknight develops, because obviously with Malik Monk gone, Bouknight's probably going to step into that role next year of just a spurt scoring guard off the bench. The only thing I'm worried about, though, is just James Bouknight. I don't want him going down the same path Malik Monk did. Yes, Malik Monk had a lot of things go wrong for him in his career, but at the same time, if James Bouknight's just going to be your scoring shooting guard off the bench, unless he's doing that in a six-man-of-the-year fashion, is putting up high-volume scoring numbers every single night, I don't think that's a very optimal choice for his development to put him in a bench role and put him in a Malik Monk role. I think they're going to handle it a lot better, because I think they have a method to their madness. There's a reason they picked James Bouknight to play around 25, 30 minutes a game within the next few years and just put up numbers across the board once he starts developing. So I don't think it's going to really backfire because they have a really solid young core, and they also have some vets along with that mixed in. So I think they have a really bright future. And this backcourt, there are questions for Bouknight's development, but I think it could very well end up working because Rozier, another guy, is a combo guard who could make a little bit. He's known for his scoring, and down the stretch he could score as well. LaMelo Ball is the playmaker. So I have a few questions about Bouknight's development, but as a whole, as an encore product, I don't have many questions.
Nader, do you think – so they brought him back over Devontae Graham. Do you think that was the right move? And also, do you think Terry Rozier is deserving of almost $100 million contract over the course of 4 years?
Yeah, I definitely don't understand why people are saying this is an overpay. Charlotte doesn't necessarily generate free agent interest that much. So getting a guy that can create and hit shots at the pace that Terry Rozier does that also fits the ideal and chemistry of your team is a solid signing. $97 million is a lot of money, but again, that's what, $22 million per year, which is probably adequate for someone with Terry's production. And I think losing Malik Monk and Devontae Graham wasn't necessarily a big loss, but it definitely took out of their guard room. So drafting James Bouknight and getting Terry Rozier back on a 4-year, $97 million deal definitely helps them out in the sense that it keeps that same guard rotation, or actually, in my opinion, makes it a bit better when it comes to potential. Because Malik Monk, we saw what he did on the Hornets. It wasn't necessarily great, and I don't blame him. Devontae Graham took a step back after LaMelo Ball was drafted. So keeping LaMelo Ball and Terry Rozier, who have proved to be able to coexist with one another, is, in my opinion, pretty solid. And yeah, I believe that Terry Rozier, it's not necessarily going to hurt James Bouknight. I understand where Justin's coming from because it can almost put his career on the back burner in some aspect. But at the same time, if they can, if James Borrego can find a way to make that three-man rotation work, like like many other people have, like back when Billy Donovan made Dennis Schroeder, Chris Paul, and Shai Gilgeous-Alexander work, where Dennis Schroeder was a Sixth Man of the Year candidate, and Chris Paul and Shai Gilgeous-Alexander had two fantastic seasons starting. So I don't think it's I don't think it's an overpay, and I think it's an overall great signing for Charlotte.
Thomas, let's talk about the Celtics because they made 2 contract extensions in Robert Williams and Marcus Smart. Obviously, those are 2 really key members of their core, not named, obviously, Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum. Do you think both deals were fair for the money that they got, and are they both moves that they absolutely should have made?
Yeah, I mean, I think you just kind of have to. I mean, Marcus Smart is, a top 50 player in this league, the 3rd best player on their team pretty easily. You just gotta keep him at all costs, and to get him for less than $20 million, like that's a great contract. Like I just don't see a world where that kind of money to Marcus Smart is going to end up turning out bad for you. I understand that, like some people say, oh, Marcus Smart's overrated. Look at his efficiency, look at his all that kind of stuff. But at the end of the day, Marcus Smart is the exact type of person that the Celtics really need because they seem to be a very introverted kind of team. Like my thing with the Celtics is that sometimes I wondered if the leadership was lacking a little bit because and I remember we talked about this a while ago, I think in the bubble with Pranav about how Tatum doesn't have that alpha dog mentality. It's just not he's just not that kind of person. And that's okay. But Marcus Smart is that kind of person. And I think that they'll need someone like that. His point of attack defense, his playmaking, all that kind of stuff will be useful as well. And for Robert Williams, I mean, 4 years, $54 million. I don't see how you can say that's a bad contract, excluding health. Obviously, health's been the biggest thing for Robert Williams, but his development has been really fascinating with the Celtics. I mean, he went from a legit black hole on both ends of the floor to a really stout rim protector who could switch a little bit. And then on offense, great rim runner, great play finisher, has turned himself into a passer, which is incredibly promising for his development, has developed a solid mid-range shot. There's just the development of Robert Williams has been very, very interesting to track. And I think if you look at his the way he's kind of his trajectory, I should say, if he continues going on the way that he's already going, if he continues to go on that path, he's going to be a top 10 center anytime really soon. The only issue with him is the health. And that is a big concern, but for what, I'm trying to think,
$13.5 million, I believe.
Yeah, $13.5 million annually. That's not really a huge issue to me. So if that's someone you're planning on starting at center or making a key part of your team, then I don't see how either of these contracts were bad.
Yeah, I think the smart one, you just had to do it, even if you maybe paid him like a few extra million per year. I mean, he's just a guy he's the longest tenured Celtic on the team, and he's been that for quite some time. And his defense did regress a little bit last year, but I need to see a little bit more before I'm ready to say that Marcus Smart isn't one of the best perimeter defenders in the league. He's extremely versatile. He's like one of the only 6'5". He is the only 6'5" guards that can match up against like some big men in the league and actually hold his own to some degree. And that's just special. And the reality is, in today's NBA, starting caliber guards like a Marcus Smart, they do get close to $20 million per year. That's just kind of what the market dictates that they get. So I think it's a fine deal. Robert Williams, I think this could be a steal of a contract in a few years, not now, because this is a contract that's really kind of like the Jaylen Brown one. A lot of people a couple years ago, they criticized the Celtics for paying Jaylen Brown too much, but if you think about it, Jaylen Brown was going to improve over the course of his career, and he's going to play into the contract that he got. And lo and behold, that's exactly what he's done. I think a similar thing's going to happen to Robert Williams. You paid him, $13.5 million. Maybe he's not quite worth that now. Just with a little bit more consistency, that's really all it takes. Like you said, Thomas, the trajectory that he's on, he's going to outplay that by quite a big margin. I mean, Jared Allen just got a $20 million contract. I think Robert Williams can be a similar kind of player to Jared Allen in his production over the next couple of years. So getting him for $13.5 million for the next 4 years, that's just great value for his potential impact that he's going to have for your basketball team. So two good deals for the Celtics. We're going to move on to the NBA schedule. It's been releasing slowly but surely. We've got the opening day games, Lakers and Warriors, and the Nets and Bucks. Got our Christmas Day games, and of course, now the teams themselves are starting to release their full schedule, so we're really getting the whole picture here. What high-profile games and matchups are you guys most looking forward to? You guys can take this in any direction you want. Justin, I'll start with you, man.
I mean, we have to talk about Lakers versus Nets because that's the premier marquee matchup of this entire slate. And obviously, all these Christmas games are great. I'm looking forward to Hawks, Knicks, and all the other games, really. But those are the two games I'm most excited for, especially Lakers, Nets, because just from a point of view of a watcher, from someone that's just watching the game, these are the two teams that you just want to see go at it. It's like basically an all-star game. Like 3 all-stars on each team necessarily. You have Kyrie, KD, Harden. You have Russ, LeBron, AD. And it's really interesting for me. It's going to be really fun to watch how these teams match up. And if we get a final series, that'll be even better. But it's going to be interesting to see how they match up because the Lakers obviously have the more physical team. They're bigger. But the Nets are obviously just plain out more talented, flat out more talented than the Los Angeles Lakers. So that's going to be the most interesting part to me, seeing how they match up rather than even just watching the game. As I said, from watching the game, it's going to be an extremely great game no matter what, like no matter who plays, who doesn't, if there's a few guys out. It's going to be a really fun game. It's just going to be interesting to see how they match up. And the other game I was talking about, Hawks-Knicks, that's one of the games I'm excited for as well, just to see how the Knicks improve with this improved offense from this offseason. They got Kemba Walker, Evan Fournier. They re-signed all their guys. They got Alec Burks back. Their offense is looking a lot better, and I'm interested to see them play against the Atlanta Hawks to see how they differentiate their game plan from last year because obviously Randall went cold. He got locked down. They were getting guys in his face a lot through a lot of his shot attempts, and I want to see how they bounce back. It's going to be interesting to see that. And obviously the storylines there at the Garden was Trae Young. So the Garden's going to be electric on Christmas. And overall, it's just a really fun slate. But those are the two games I'm looking forward most to.
Nader, talk to me about the Bulls schedule. They released their full schedule. What's your reaction? You know, the Bulls, they have a whole new look this year. Should be a much improved team. But what do you make of the schedule for them?
Yeah, and I just wanted to set this clear. So as a Bulls fan, a few weeks ago on The Ball, I made sure me and Justin got into a little debate where I said that I was not a fan of what the Chicago Bulls were doing. And I completely flipped my script. I am pro Bulls. I am pro DeMar DeRozan. I am pro Lonzo Ball, which I already was. And I'm very, very excited. And the takeaway that I had from the schedule release today is that we have a lot of positives. We finish out 5 out of our last 6 home games. So 5 out of the last games of the season are at home. And in that stretch, we played teams like the Heat, the Bucks, the Celtics, the Hornets, and the Timberwolves. And with the Heat, Bucks, and Celtics, and especially the Hornets, who are a young team in the East that could potentially make the playoffs, that can have a lot of say in playoff implications. So I'm very happy that we have those games at home. And also, when I'm talking about, just another really good positive thing, we have a really easy February where we play a 9-3 home to away game ratio, which is very good, especially for that last stretch of the season, last 2 months of the season. You're like 4 to 5 months into the year. And now in February, we're going to be able to have a really good advantage. We have 6 more home games than we have away games, which is fantastic. But the one negative thing that I took away is the fact that we have a really, really tough November where we go on like a 10-game skid where we play all playoff contenders, and at least 6 to 7 of them are probably serious championship aspirations. So it's really going to test our might, and it's really going to be able to, say it's going to test our team for the better. So I'm really excited. I'm happy with our schedule. We open up against the Pistons, and we also open up at home against the New Orleans Pelicans. And I'm hoping to be able to go to some games some year and watch some good basketball. So I'm very excited for my Bulls.
Thomas, what was your main takeaway from the schedule release?
I think there are a lot of really cool matchups. Kind of an interesting thing I wanted to talk about was how the NBA is doing these 75 classic matchups, which I'll kind of give like a quick rundown. But basically, like obviously this is the NBA's 75th season that they're celebrating. And so to do that, they've come up with this like kind of cool concept where they're doing like a bunch of like classic games and like, classic battles, and they're kind of like redoing them over. Like, for example, the first regular season game that the NBA ever played was versus the Knicks and the Toronto Huskies, now the Toronto Raptors. And so on November 1st, 7:30, the Raptors are going to end up playing the Knicks. And then the 3 franchises that have played in every NBA season are going to play each other on Tuesday and Friday, and those are the Knicks, the Celtics, and the Warriors. The Warriors and the Knicks play, the Warriors and the Celtics play, and then the Knicks and the Celtics play. I thought that concept was really, really cool. Just something pretty interesting I wanted to share.
Yeah, no, for sure. I didn't even know that was happening. Actually, I'm surprised.
Yeah,
I don't know
cool.
if for some reason I just haven't seen that. I'm pretty active on NBA Twitter, but I don't know. I guess people just maybe don't care about that until it happens. We'll see. Hopefully, it'll be interesting to see for those classic games. It would be nice if they had like retro jerseys.
It would.
Bring back sleeve jerseys.
That would be
bring back
maybe
sleeve
my favorite
jerseys.
thing. Yeah.
Of
that. But I think my biggest takeaway was for the Golden State Warriors. 41 out of their 82 games are nationally televised games. And I mean, that's literally half of their schedule is nationally televised. And I absolutely love that because obviously we're going to see the return of Klay Thompson, and I want to see as much of Klay Thompson as possible. I want to see as much of Klay Thompson and Steph Curry, the Splash Brothers, together on the court, because we haven't seen that literally since June of 2019 in Game 6 of the 2019 finals, which seems forever ago. It was before COVID, before the bubble, before all of that. That was literally the last time we've seen these guys play together. So I think having the Warriors having as many, they should be one of the most highly marketable teams. They're going to be one of the best teams in the league, in my opinion. So I absolutely love this, putting Steph, Draymond Green, and Klay Thompson on live TV as much as possible. I think is great. A negative thing though is no Jokic on Christmas. I mean, he was the MVP, and instead, got teams like the Celtics and the Jazz. And personally, I would have liked to see the Suns versus the Nuggets, because obviously I know the Suns swept them, but Jamal Murray wasn't there. And I think the Suns probably still would have won that series, but it would have been different. It would have been much more competitive. So I think you have that a little bit of a rematch, hopefully with a healthy Jamal Murray, and that can be your Christmas Day game. I think that would just make more sense than Suns Jazz, but that's just me. And look, a lot of people will say negative things about Jokic and that, discrediting his MVP, and maybe that stuff wouldn't happen if the NBA decided to put the Nuggets and Jokic on primetime basketball, so more casual NBA fans could see how great Nikola Jokic truly is. That's just my take. I think he should be on. Also, I'm disappointed that it was Bucks Celtics on Christmas. It should have been Bucks Heat, in my opinion. Because first of all, Bucks Heat, those are two contenders. I think those are two top 3 teams in the East, right there with the Nets. The Celtics are a playoff team for sure, but Bucks Heat it's the playoff matchup that we've seen the past 2 years. We got the Bucks, who just swept the Heat, and then the year before that, the Heat gentlemen swept the Bucks. So I just think that that's not really a rivalry, but it's closer to a rivalry and a more intriguing matchup for sure than Bucks Celtics. So I think they missed the mark a little bit on that one. Still excited as ever though. NBA schedule, it's going to be great. But guys, let's transition into some trade action. Still have some trades happening, surprisingly. Clippers, so basically 3 teams are involved in this, but the Clippers trade away Patrick Beverly, Rajon Rondo, and Daniel Oturu to the Grizzlies for Eric Bledsoe. And then the Grizzlies, obviously, they traded away Patrick Beverly to the Timberwolves. So we'll start with the Clippers, end of the deal. Eric Bledsoe to the Clippers. Justin, do you think that really accomplishes anything at all for the Clippers?
I think it does to an extent. I don't expect Eric Bledsoe to be here when Kawhi Leonard comes back from injury next season. So I think they'll move on from him then. But the Clippers, they're still a team that wants to win now, even without their best player, even without their top 5 player in Kawhi Leonard. They want to win now because without Kawhi in the playoffs, they were still a really great team. They lost in 6 games against the Suns, who made the NBA Finals, and they took down the Utah Jazz even without Kawhi Leonard. So this is still a really great team, but it's time to see how that translates to the regular season because I personally think this team is more suited for the playoffs than the regular season. And I think this move really just raises their ceiling in the regular season as a whole because Eric Bledsoe, yes, in the playoffs, he's not great. And in the playoffs, I'd much rather have a guy like Patrick Beverly who could consistently hit open shots when you need him to. But Eric Bledsoe in the regular season is still a fine player. He's still a great defender. He's still an okay playmaker, a good passer at least. And offensively, he doesn't do much, but he's still a solid slasher at points. So this move really for the Clippers, I think the main reason it was done, other than ceiling raising for this regular season, is just to get some cap off the books because they traded Beverly and Rondo's contract and Oturu as well, who's making a minimum deal for a rookie, but that's still money getting off the table. So they cleared a lot of cap room in this trade, and they could go out next offseason and potentially sign a solid role player if Serge Ibaka decides to leave, or just another role player in general on top of that. And after adding the Reggie Jackson contract, which went from a minimum to an $11 million deal roughly this offseason, they're going to need some more money on the books to play around with for the next few offseasons. So for that perspective, I like Eric Bledsoe on the Clippers. Again, I mean, like it's a regular season move. In the playoffs, they probably wouldn't have done much anyway without Kawhi Leonard. And Eric Bledsoe, it's not going to really like make any difference in the playoffs, I don't think. They're not going to lose a round simply because they don't have Patrick Beverly. So I think it's a fine trade. Like it's nothing to lose sleep over.
Yeah, to be specific on the money side, the financial side of things, I believe Clippers with this deal they've shredded about $30 million off of their luxury tax bill, which is great. Obviously, they gained an $8 million trade exception, which is cool. They can use that for a mid-level player. And then if you look at the Eric Bledsoe or his contract specifically, this year he's making 18 mil, but next year in 2022 he's going to be making 19 million. However, only 44 million of that 19 is guaranteed for that year. So basically, if they waive him or move him in some way, they're only due 4 million in dead cap money to him, and not 19. So that's 15 mil that they've kind of saved there. So there's definitely, I think that's the notable end of this trade. Not necessarily what does Eric Bledsoe add, but it's more of what the Clippers can do with more cap and financial flexibility. But Nader, for the Grizzlies, because no one's really been talking about the Grizzlies, but do you think the Grizzlies, do you think adding Rondo really does much for them?
This deal just didn't make much sense to me. It was just really out of the blue. Like when the Twitter notification popped up, I was just very surprised in general. I just didn't know what to think. And although I do believe that this is a great move for both sides, it definitely makes sense because, the Clippers were able to get some money off the books, although I'm not a huge fan of it because Eric Bledsoe isn't the point guard that he used to be. Because Eric Bledsoe, a few years ago, he was considered to be a high-end starter or even close to it. But at the same time, this doesn't make the Clippers much better because they do lose Beverly and Rondo, who are two solid players in their guard rotation last year, along with Reggie Jackson. But at the same time, I believe that the Grizzlies, they ended up getting Rondo, who could definitely play some minutes at the backup point guard spot. He can bring in some veteran leadership. Rondo he's come in and he's switched teams a lot in the past few years. And he's always had I would never say that he's had a negative impact on the teams that he's landed on. But at the same point, them trading Beverly did hurt a bit because, in my opinion, I'd rather take Beverly now over Rondo, although he does have his attitude issues. But yeah, it's definitely a weird deal. They did get rid of Eric Bledsoe, who was making $18 million and wasn't going to help them win now. because the Grizzlies are still sort of in that rebuilding, moving to the bridge year contending phase. And Eric Bledsoe wasn't going to help with $18 million. They cleared some money off the books. So yeah, I think that the Grizzlies did a pretty solid job right here.
Thomas, which side do you think won, real quick?
Oh, I guess I would probably just have to go with the Clippers, because you're shredding so much money, you're getting a trade exception, you're gonna be able to get rid of Eric Bledsoe, so you basically just don't have to pay as much money. You can sign someone that won't go into your cap space, and nothing really happened. Because when Eric Bledsoe's gone, nothing's really gonna matter. So and like for the Grizzlies side of it, like. Honestly, like considering age, considering contract, I would rather have every single player that the Clippers traded to get Eric Bledsoe than Eric Bledsoe. Like I would rather have Patrick Beverly, Rajon Rondo, and Daniel Oturu on my basketball team rather than Eric Bledsoe. That's just the way I kind of look at it. And then obviously they got some more assets by trading Patrick Beverly, which Justin, I know you wanted to talk about, so I'll let you talk about that.
Yeah. Honestly, Justin, take it away. So we'll talk about the Timberwolves, not even just them getting Patrick Beverly, but really just their outlook as a whole. I know Justin is super, like, pretty ridiculously high on the Minnesota Timberwolves. So Justin, take it away. What is your thoughts on how Patrick Beverly is going to help the Timberwolves, and also just your outlook for the Timberwolves next season?
A few weeks ago on Twitter, I said that the Timberwolves will make the second round next year, and yes, that's a really bold take. And I think a lot has to go right for that to happen, because I don't think they're beating Golden State or the Lakers or the Nuggets. But I think if enough goes right, it's very possible, because this team, before the Patrick Beverly deal, the offense was there. And with Chris Finch, he showed that he was an offensive mastermind borderline when he was coaching this team for the second half of the year. And he was helping them win games as well. He used D'Angelo Russell more as a playmaker rather than a scorer, which is his best role, because D'Angelo Russell is a very easy player to use wrong. But when you get him right, he's a pretty impactful third guy as a playmaker and passer, and a guy that could score just off the catch threes and just at times create for himself. He's not a great finisher, but offensively, he's a great player when you use him right. Anthony Edwards was a top 10 scorer after the All-Star break. People are saying, oh, Edwards was great after the All-Star break, but no one really realizes how great he was. He was legitimately a top 10 scorer after the All-Star break. And I know a lot of players got injured, so that's a big reason why. But if he could maintain that level of play and potentially be a 23 to maybe, dare I say, a 25-point per game scorer on good efficiency next year, that's going to be huge. And then Karl Anthony Towns, when he's healthy, which is obviously the huge if, when he's healthy, one of the best offensive big men of all time, really. And then they have other guys around that. Jaden McDaniels, another guy that I think takes a jump, especially on the defensive end, while giving enough on offense. But before they made this deal, the real things that they needed were essentially just veteran presence and defense. And Patrick Beverly brings both of those things. He's one of the savviest veterans in the league, and he brings a real alpha mentality to this team and to the locker room. And I know on the court it seems like he's just this loose cannon, but in the locker room, he's bound to be a huge part of that and helping develop some of the young guys on the team, because this is a very young team, and that's where his veteran presence comes in with his playoff experience. That's going to really help this team, and I don't think this team is going to be some like top 3, 4, 5 seed in the West, but if they could get a 6 seed and potentially go against a team like the Utah Jazz, I think if Chris Finch can game plan well enough against the Jazz, that's a series that they could win depending on how these guys develop and depending on how their season goes, how healthy they are. If they could develop and really stay healthy and develop chemistry together, I think this is a team that can make noise in the playoffs seriously as soon as next year and develop one of the best young cores in the NBA, because really the defense obviously isn't there, but they have enough to surpass that with that offense that they have. And I think they should go out and sign a minimum guy, not necessarily to play, but a minimum veteran, maybe just off the top of my head, a guy like Ersan Ilyasova, just like a veteran like that, like not particularly him, but like someone like that, just a veteran. I think they should go out and sign a few more so they could get some more veteran presence in the locker room. But I think this was a really good trade for the Timberwolves, because you're just giving up Jarrett Culver essentially. So it's a really good deal, and I love it for the Timberwolves' sake.
Nader and Thomas, do you guys agree with Justin's kind of bold take on the Timberwolves?
I mean, I think I'm not like all the way. I think the Timberwolves are going to be a play-in team, probably like 7, 8, 9, 10. That's more where I kind of view them. I'm not as sold on Anthony Edwards becoming this like top 15 scorer, top 10 scorer in the league next year. He was like super inefficient on pull-up jumpers. Like he took a lot of them and missed a lot of them. And for someone that I'm asking to be the second option on my team, to be a go-to perimeter creator, I just need to see those numbers improve. Off like catch and shoot, he was fine from 3. But just like off the dribble from mid-range from 3, he just really, really struggled. Even as a finisher, like his percentages around the rim weren't great. He's just going to need to become a lot more efficient as a scorer in order for me to fully buy into him being the second guy. I think he'll be fine enough as a passer. I think his defense is going to have to come along too as well. I'm not all the way there on Ant-Man having this like huge sophomore surge and becoming this all-star level player averaging around 25 points per game. D'Angelo Russell is fine. Still have my questions about him too. I think Jaden's going to have a really good season as well, but there's just too much good competition in the West. Like, I just don't know. Like, there aren't a lot of teams who can't compete in the West. Like, simply put, I just think that asking them to be a second-round team, essentially making them one of the top 4 teams in the West, that's just a lot to ask, and I'm not willing to go there yet.
I agree with Thomas. I mean, I understand Justin's take, and I like it. I think that the Timberwolves' ceiling does see them be a playoff team, but at the same time, a lot of things have to go right. Anthony Edwards does have to take that sophomore jump. Jaden McDaniels does have to continue to be really good like he was in the flashes he's shown. D'Angelo Russell has to continue to fit that role as a playmaker. And the thing is, like, they're going to be having to compete. Like last year, when you look at the playoff landscape, you had the Utah Jazz, the Phoenix Suns, you had the Nuggets, the Clippers, the Lakers, the Warriors. All of them were in the playoff. All of them were in the playoff picture. And when you really look at it, it's going to be really, really tough for them to make it. And if they were in the Eastern Conference, sure, I'd say that they had a good shot rather than the Western Conference, because there's just so many good teams that are ready to win now. And, we're going to have to see them still compete with the teams like the Mavericks, who have Luka, who can potentially trade Porzingis and try and get something out of that. They're going to have to be competing still because Dame is still on the Blazers. Dame is still there. And the Grizzlies are a nice young team. It's just a really all-around tough conference. And at their ceiling, I can see them being a playoff team, but it's just really hard for me to believe right now.
Yeah, I think they're definitely in the running for a play-in spot at the very least. To me, I mean, there's a whole lot of talent on this team. Like, you look at the roster, and you could argue this is a top 8 team when it comes to just pure talent, especially on the offensive side of the ball. Like we said, like D'Angelo Russell, I think D'Angelo Russell is a little bit underrated now. Nobody really talks about D'Angelo Russell being that good anymore. He used to be a bit overrated when he was, that all-star player who got in that 1 year a few years ago with the Nets. But at this point, the injuries have certainly hurt him. But when he's on the court, he's still one of the better point guards in the league. I think it's a fair statement to make. Anthony Edwards certainly has all-star potential. And then you have top 3 center in Karl-Anthony Towns, Jaden McDaniels, who I think we're all pretty high on. There's a lot of talent on this team. Patrick Beverly only helps them with, like you said, veteran leadership. And, of course, his perimeter defense is going to be excellent. That's something that they definitely need, more defense on this team. But the West is so good, and it's just like the West isn't getting any worse. So, to me, the only teams that they're necessarily better than are the Kings, the Rockets, the Thunder, and the Spurs. And that's it. Like, those are the only teams that I can definitively say that the Timberwolves are better than. I can argue that they are better than the Grizzlies, and I can argue that they're better than the Pelicans. And I could even argue that they're better than the Clippers, maybe. But even then, like the Clippers, I understand the Timberwolves might have more talent than the Clippers, roster-wise, but the Clippers.
Yeah, I forgot they don't have Kawhi. You're right.
Yeah, exactly. They don't without Kawhi.
They don't have Kawhi. Without Kawhi, maybe, and that's still a huge maybe.
Right. Yeah, and even then, I would say the Clippers still are probably better, just because Tyronn Lue's one of the best coaches. You still have Paul George on the team, and you saw the team rise up when it mattered in the playoffs. Like, they're still a pretty good basketball team at the end of the day, even with less talent, obviously, and losing Kawhi. So to me, with the Timberwolves, they're definitely they're a team that could be in the running for, I think, most improved team of the year, especially considering what they were like this 14th in the West. They were the 14th seed in the West. I think they're going to be at least 11 if not probably in a play-in spot. And I think, Justin, your take is very fair. And in 2 to 3 years, yeah, winning a round in the playoffs is definitely possible. But to win a round in the playoffs, you got to be a top 4 team in the West. And top 4 is really, really rich for the Timberwolves.
I want to add one thing. I think like this could be premature, and like to an extent, like it doesn't matter because every year there's surprise teams, but like it could be premature, and I understand that argument. And I do think for regular season standings, I think between like 6 through 11 in the West, I could see that going like any way. Like if the Timberwolves don't make the playoffs, I wouldn't be shocked. But I think this is a team that starts off a little slow towards like the 25% through the year. They start ramping it up and just start getting better and better. And I think a guy like Anthony Edwards, Thomas said he was inefficient, and he definitely was. There's no arguing against that. But post All-Star break, his efficiency definitely started to rise. And although he still had his inconsistencies, although he still had his moments of just some bad shots and just not making those shots that he was taking, it was getting better for him with more NBA reps. And now he gets a full offseason to come back into the NBA atmosphere in his second year. And I don't think he's going to be some top 10 scorer. He was a top 10 scorer post All-Star break, according to all the numbers and just watching. He was top 10, but again, all those injuries helped that. But if Anthony Edwards could be around like 22, 23 points per game on above league average efficiency, I think that's enough to ask for him. And if this Timberwolves team doesn't make the second round, I'm not going to be like disappointed in them because obviously, again, it's premature. It's hard to say that. But every single year there's a surprise team, and I think that's not going to change at all. I think that'll be Minnesota because I just buy into their coaching. I fully buy into their offense. And the defense definitely raises some question marks, but Jay McDaniels, I think, will take enough of a jump, and Karl Anthony Towns will continue to slightly improve on that end, along with guys like Jared Vanderbilt and adding Patrick Beverly. I think that'll be enough to make it so like their defense isn't flat out just losing them games night in and night out. But this team is a wild card because, again, I could see them completely missing the play-in tournament as a whole, but that's just how the West is stacked like that. So it could definitely backfire on me, but I think it's definitely possible.
I think health is the biggest factor at the end of the day. Like that's been the biggest detractor from the Timberwolves. Like they've always had the talent on their roster. It's just that Karl Anthony Towns has had, off the court issues. Unfortunately, Anthony Edwards had some injury problems last year. D'Angelo Russell has obviously had his injury problems. Malik Beasley got suspended. They've just been – they're a full group. All this talent hasn't been together. And even when they were, Saunders obviously wasn't the best coach for them. So they just haven't had anything go right. They have a fresh start. And so I think improvement is just the name of the game for the Timberwolves. We're going to move on and talk about a long-awaited, kind of much anticipated interview between Kevin Durant and Draymond Green, where they talked about just some of the fallout between Kevin Durant and the Warriors and what they think caused it. They referenced, obviously, that argument that they had against the Clippers 3 years ago. And personally, just before we get into this, I really hope we get more interviews like this because I think it's pretty rare that you get two players, especially that are still playing. Like Kevin Durant and Draymond Green, but neither of them have retired. Neither of them are even all that close to retiring. It's only like a few years removed. Kobe and Shaq, they did their big interview, but that was obviously both were retired at that point. So I think it's definitely good that you get these kind of interviews. Hopefully we can see more of these with Steph Curry could do one, LeBron James could do one at some point down the line. I definitely think it's better. But Nader, what was your biggest takeaway just from the full completed interview?
Yeah, and for my first biggest takeaway, and the first thing that I wanted to say is that Draymond Green, after he retires from the sport of basketball, he's going to stay involved, and he's going to stay involved in a fantastic way. He's a great analyst. He's a great interview. He's a great personality to have on camera. And I just wanted to give huge props to him for this interview because not only did the questions he asked were great, but the way he conducted and he kept it going was also at a very amazing pace. So I just wanted to give a quick shout out to him. But yeah, it was very interesting how they revealed some stuff. Like they actually said, and Draymond Green is still a member of the Warriors too, which really surprised me. He was actually speaking about how the GM of the Warriors, Myers, how he actually wanted him to apologize to KD, and he revealed that he was laughing at him and that he got super angry at him. And they both came to a conclusion that the Warriors front office was the one that actually pushed Kevin Durant out rather than Draymond Green. And I thought that this will go down as probably, a very interesting interview that we'll look back on for years and really take because, they revealed some stuff. They're still really close after the argument, which I love to see. And Kevin Durant, he's one of the biggest personalities in all of sport. His Twitter fingers, his Slim Reaper, his snake, all that stuff, like all those different identities of him pull into one. And it just made one fantastic interview. I was a huge fan of it. And yeah, if you haven't, you should definitely go check that out.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things, we really got a really good look at just Kevin Durant and who he is. Not only, like, obviously we know who he is as a basketball player, but just overall his mentality and who he is as a person. Kevin Durant, he sees things differently than I think really a lot of other people. We know he's about basketball only, and we saw that several parts. There's just a recurring theme across the interview. Kevin Durant, he said he wanted to go to the Warriors. He knew that he would get a ton of backlash, but he didn't really look at it like, oh, what is this going to mean for my legacy? Like, who really cares? Because at the end of the day, he also mentioned how, he used to kind of like be a little timid towards the media when they were asking questions. But he's not really like that anymore, because he doesn't really view them on like a pedestal that he did once again, because he just thinks that they're kind of trying to get more of a story out of them than actually trying to engage in like meaningful basketball talk, which is true for the most part, to be honest. So it's a good observation, obviously, by Kevin Durant there. But going back to the move that he made to Golden State, he made that move just because the basketball fit was seamless. Like, Kevin Durant knew that the style that the Warriors play basketball, and he wanted to be a part of that because of how great that they could be. And I mean, he was absolutely right, because they were an unbeatable team, probably the best team, maybe the best team we've ever seen, just from a pure talent and fit perspective, how all the pieces work together. Steph Curry just being able to play off ball and being the engine that he is. Kevin Durant, obviously, the scoring machine that he is. Klay Thompson being the off-ball threat, and then Draymond Green obviously creating and being an all-time great defender that he is. Everything just worked in a complete machine, and it produced great results. And so Kevin Durant saw that from the beginning. He didn't really care what the reaction would be, because he's just like, this basketball fit's amazing, and I'm going to do it because of how great we can be on the basketball court. And I don't really care what the big media personalities are really going to tell me about what it is, and people on Twitter. Also, with the Twitter stuff, I think it also proves that Kevin Durant, he also said that when he does respond to Twitter, it's always basketball. It's not like politics or any other stuff. And that is true. He just kind of, he explains what he thinks about certain things about the sport, and it just is what it is. He doesn't really go into other stuff on Twitter. So he just responds to the basketball stuff that happens. And I think another thing is both KD and Draymond, they're louder than a lot of other people on social media, especially. Draymond Green's obviously the loudest player on the court 99% of the time. Kevin Durant, not necessarily, but when it comes to social media, in the eyes of social media, they're just extremely loud on social media, and they do it in their different styles. And I just love that about them, because they don't really sugarcoat anything about a single thing about who they are and what they want to say in front of anyone. They're just like authentically themselves. And I think that's pretty refreshing, because, sometimes we'll see a lot of big celebrities and big athletes. I won't name any names, but they kind of just, they take the higher route, which I think there's no shame in that. But it's also just refreshing to see a few athletes like a Damian Lillard, Draymond Green, Kevin Durant just authentically express what they believe in with no shame, and they don't really care who's going to say what about it. They just end up doing it. And so I think we got for this interview, we really got a great look at just what Kevin Durant and who he is along every step of his career. And I think he absolutely made the right response in saying that, would I do that, like move to Golden State again, knowing everything that's happened since then, and all like the snake memes and the my next destination on the Players Tribune, all those memes and all the jokes and stuff. Would he do it again? Absolutely, he would do it again. And Kevin Durant sees all that stuff because he's on Twitter quite often, and he responds to a lot of those stuff. So he sees all that stuff. He's seen it all, but he doesn't care, because he would make that move 100 times out of 100. So I think we definitely got a great look at Kevin Durant, and that was the whole point of it. So Draymond Green, like you said, Nader, did an excellent job, and it was just all around a great interview, and hopefully we can get more interviews like that.
Yeah, I think that this will also start a trend of just two players sitting down. Kobe and Shaq did it. Now Draymond and KD will do it, and I hope that more players continue to follow. Because, especially with the way things go on, we never knew what that inside source was when it came to KD and Draymond's argument. We never knew the backstory. And now that fans finally know how it is, it's just very refreshing to see, as you said. And, with all four of us being analysts, all four of us having a presence on social media and whatever range we have, we always encounter what we like to call keyboard warriors. And I just want to say that Kevin Durant is like a good version, like the rare good version of a keyboard warrior. And I think that he should keep it up. So yeah, I'm a big fan of him and what he does.
Yeah, I mean, Sometimes I'll even find myself being a keyboard warrior, but it's usually, in a good way, even though it is kind of personified as a bad thing. But let's move on to our last topic, and that's going to be, we're going to get into a player debate, all-time player debate. Obviously, this is between Magic Johnson and Steph Curry. Steph Curry is obviously still playing basketball. Magic Johnson's been retired for decades. So this is really an all-time debate. Thomas, we'll start with you. I know where you're going with this. Steph Curry or Magic Johnson, who do you want on your basketball team?
Give me Steph Curry. And look, I'm not going to be like one of those people that's like, I don't look at it from a standpoint of like, oh yeah, I was around for Steph Curry, so I automatically think he's better than Magic. I don't really think that's the case at all. I think there's a fairly simple argument for me. Quite simply, I think Steph Curry was better on both ends of the floor compared to Magic Johnson. Offensively, I don't think there's a question. Steph, to me, is the best offensive player ever, best shooter ever, one of the best scorers ever, the best playmaker ever, best off-ball mover ever, most efficient player ever. Like, you go down
the
the
list
line.
goes on. The list goes on.
Yeah,
the list continues to go down.
Right, it just goes on and on and on. And while Magic was definitely a top 10, maybe even top 5 offensive player ever, no one just matches Steph's level of historic volume with efficiency and on and off ball scoring, plus his scoring gravity, his playmaking, his passing ability, all that kind of stuff. And then defensively, I think Magic Johnson's pretty overrated. I think people look at, oh, he's 6'7", he must have been versatile, he must have been switchable. That really wasn't the case at all. I think Steph Curry's pretty clearly a better defender. He's had some seasons as a neutral or even a slight positive like this past season. He's a really solid team defender. He's not great on the ball because he's not super big. But he is a really good team defender. He's a decent help defender. He has good instincts. He knows what's going on out there. And I'm not saying Magic Johnson doesn't, but I think Steph is definitely better on the defensive end of the floor. The biggest argument that I've seen really is rings and longevity. Rings for me don't really play a factor. I want to see how you perform in such championships because for me, winning a ring, while it is very, very important, is a team thing. It's not an individual person. It's not Steph Curry didn't win 3 championships. The Golden State Warriors won 3 championships. I just look at how Steph individually performed in that finals. How did he help his team win the championship? Not did he win the championship or not, because I think that relies on far too many variables that one person really just can't handle. And then the longevity argument, I get it. I understand. My main point is that I think we talked about this last week. I don't really care about longevity if it's somewhat comparable, right? Magic didn't have great longevity. He did have to leave the NBA. He had a couple of pretty poor seasons at the end of his career. His longevity wasn't great. And I understand Steph's isn't great either. But I think it's close enough to the point where I'm all right, I don't really care about longevity. Who is the better basketball player? And when you look at it from that standpoint, I just don't really see an argument for Magic Johnson.
Justin, do you disagree?
I don't disagree, but I think it's a very close debate. And the reasons I have Curry is because of everything Thomas said. The best offensive player ever. I've said it a billion times on the show. The best offensive player of all time in a lot of aspects. One of the best scorers ever, one of the best playmakers ever, the best shooter ever. And really just the list goes on. Name anything offensively, Steph Curry does it at an all-time level. But the case for Magic Johnson I still think is there because he's one of the most impactful passers of all time and overall one of the most impactful playmakers of all time. I think Curry as a whole is a better playmaker than Magic Johnson, just what he does in terms of off-ball screen setting and moving off the ball off screens. I think he's a better playmaker, combining that with his really great on-ball playmaking when he gets the chances to do so. Obviously, he's not an elite all-time level on-ball playmaker, but what he does as a playmaker as a whole is still just ahead of Magic Johnson. But I think it's close. I think Magic, Curry, and LeBron, I think they're all in the same realm as playmakers, and it's just everyone else. And as a whole, Magic, again, defensively, he wasn't great. People think he's versatile because of his size, as Thomas said. But versatility-wise, Magic still had it because he could play a multitude of positions on the court. Positional versatility, I think, is a big thing, and Magic had that more than a lot of players of all time, really. And as a whole, just one of the better offensive engines of all time, could be your passer. And I just think Curry's a better player because of his scoring, because of his playmaking edge, which I would take. But it's not some far-fetched debate because Magic's playmaking is still, I think, really underrated because everyone knows, I think, at this point, Curry's one of the better playmakers and offensive players of all time. But now that you're comparing him to Magic, who, yes, again, is worse than Curry in my opinion, it's just like people are starting to say, oh, Magic's just overrated as a playmaker. No, he's not. He's still one of the best passers ever and one of the best playmakers ever. So I don't understand that argument. And yes, I'd still have Curry, as I said, but it's just I think Magic still definitely has an argument. And I would take Curry for greater as well because of the longevity, because Magic's longevity is just it's not all-time longevity like a LeBron or someone like that. But I think they're still definitely close in that area. So as of now, I would go Curry, and within the next 2-3 years, I think it's definitely Curry. But it's closer for right now.
Nader, I would assume you don't have any disagreements with that. But so you probably have Steph Curry, but why? Is it for the same reasons, or do you have anything different, really?
Yeah, I mean, in general, I'm going to say this now. I believe that when, as Pranav said in the comments, in a matter of 2 to 3 years, people will see that it's not as close as a debate as most people think. Longevity, when my criteria for ranking all-time players, I look at their peaks, I look at their longevity, and those are two of the main things that I look at. And Curry probably had one, whatever season you can consider to be his peak. Last season was probably one of his best seasons. And, he had one of the best peaks of all time. And he did it with some of the worst spacing and offensive situations in the league. And when you look back at Curry's career, not only at first he was known as the best shooter of all time, and now he's slowly become the best point guard of all time because his scoring gravity is insane. I remember watching a Twitter clip the other day. Literally, he propelled 4 Rockets players away from him by just running off ball. And it creates so many opportunities. So by having the scoring gravity that he does, it makes him one of the best playmakers of all time. Not only that, he's a pretty solid passer too. Don't get that mixed up. And basically all around, Curry's a great defender. Let me catch myself right there. I'm a big Curry fan. But no, he's not a great defender, but he's definitely a positive defender. He's improved on ball and off ball. And he's just overall, he's carried the Warriors. The Warriors had Kelly Oubre, Andrew Wiggins, and Draymond Green all starting at the same point. Draymond Green is solid, but again, he's not a scoring threat. He's a playmaking threat. But Andrew Wiggins and Kelly Oubre are extremely inconsistent. Kelly Oubre had pretty much an identical scoring percentage on layups that Steph did on threes. If that doesn't tell you all that you need to know about the Warriors team last year, there you go. I mean, Steph Curry's going to go down as the best the best point guard of all time when it's all said and done. I believe that he has all the makings to continue to be great with his longevity. One of the best playmakers, one of the best scorers. It's just, I can go on and on about how good he is. But yeah, I'll keep it short, and I'll just say that Steph Curry is the best point guard of all time.
I think the only way I could argue Magic being better is if I looked at career accomplishments, and that's what I value, but I don't. So if that was part of my criteria, then I would throw out the rings and then a bunch of the other stuff. But personally, I don't really care that much about that. At the end of the day, I do think accomplishments, they matter, just not when it comes to these kind of player debates. They're a part of a player's resume. So Magic's resume is all-time great for sure. And he is clearly an all-time great player. I think he's no lower than 10, in my opinion. In the 8 to 10 range is where I have him. And when it comes to Curry and Magic, I did a TikTok on this actually months ago, and for the specific skill set, I had Magic advantages. I had on-ball playmaking, so basically passing, athletic profile, finishing, rebounding, versatility, leadership. And then for Curry, I had his off-ball value, scoring volume, scoring efficiency, shooting, ball handling, defense, and basically scalability. So a 7 to 6 advantage for Curry, and I think Curry's advantages are way more valuable to a basketball team than Magic, the advantages I gave to Magic. So I think Curry's a better basketball player for sure, and I think he will be a greater basketball player in, probably 2 to 3 years. If he puts up another one of these seasons, I mean, we just saw one, probably the second best season of his career. If he can put up these kind of numbers again, maybe not 32 points a game, because that'll be tough with adding another 20-plus point per game scorer in Klay Thompson. But on similar efficiency, there's no reason that he shouldn't. He's going to have more floor spacing next year. So his efficiency should be the same. He still should be averaging at least 27 points a game for the next few years. He's going to pass Magic all time. The only reason I don't have him higher is just because I think Magic came into his career and he was already a star player. From year one, he was generating high level offense through his passing and his playmaking for the Lakers, basically for a decade plus. And unfortunately, his career did get cut short, which hurts his longevity. It's not necessarily even his fault, but it just is a factor at the end of the day. But I think Magic's longevity is better just because he was so great at the beginning of his career, and that peak was sustained for quite a while. For Steph Curry, he obviously didn't come along as soon as he was drafted. He had his injury issues. He wasn't necessarily supposed to be like a superstar right away, and his peak has been better. But Curry can make up for it with his late career longevity for sure, and I expect he will. But the early career longevity is why I would have Magic over Steph all time when it comes to a greater debate. Better, I agree, Steph Curry over Magic Johnson. And the only way I could really disagree is if I cared about career accomplishments or valued rebounding more than I should. I don't know. I'm struggling to think of reasons why. But guys, that'll do it for On the Ball. Thank you for joining us on another Friday night. Before we get out of here, I just want to remind everyone to obviously like and subscribe to our YouTube channel. We're trying to hit 1,000 subscribers, and drop us a like. Also, download our mobile app, TWSN mobile app. All of our content is there. Our content from us, but also content from other people here at TWSN. Thank you for joining us. Oh, also one last note: TWSN betting advice. It is coming to TWSN. Not necessarily, well, mainly as the NFL season will come along, we'll have betting advice. So you guys want to get on that. It's going to make y'all a lot of money. It'll be worth the investment for sure. So make sure you tune in that if you're into the NFL and football, and maybe we'll even, for the upcoming NBA, we'll have some betting advice for that as well. So stay tuned for that. Thank you for joining us on another Friday night. Have a good night, everyone.
Is this the dagger?